This week, we had an update on wage inflation in the December quarter wage price index. It reported that wages had grown by 4.2% in the year to December, the strongest pace of growth since the mining boom back in 2009. However, this does not mean everyone's wage inflation is catching up to the consumer price inflation. For note, public sector wages led the way, up 1.3% over the quarter, up from 1% in September, and the strongest pace of gain since 2008, up 4.3% in the year. In contrast, private sector wages moderated to an increase of just 0.9% in December, a moderation from the 1.4% increase in September, resulting in the annual pace easing back from 4.3 to 4.2%. The fact that public sector wages outperformed is our first hint that we're seeing the softening in the labour market conditions flow through to wages. Wages in the public sector are mainly determined by enterprise agreements. These take time to update, negotiate, and come into effect. As such, they reflect previous strengths in the labour market and previous policy changes. This group's wage bargaining can also be quite lumpy as agreements are renegotiated, and December quarter this year saw 38% of the jobs in the public sector receive a pay rise, up from 29% in December 2023. The most prevalent sectors were healthcare, education and training industries, followed by changes in state-based wage policies. This is also seen more broadly for wages across the economy that are negotiated via enterprise agreements. We estimate that wages in this group are up 5.7% in the year to December, well above the national average. Contrast that with wages in sectors where activity is more closely tied to current conditions. Wage inflation in accommodation and food services eased back from 5.5% in September to 4% in December. We also note that wages negotiated via individual arrangements eased back from 3.5% in the year to 3.4%, whereas the early stages of the recovery saw the boost to wage inflation come via this sector. Now, wages are driven by collective bargaining, enterprise agreements, and changes to awards and minimum wages. We can also note that bonuses, which were once important to attract workers and keep staff in a tight labour market, are no longer prevalent in workers' compensation. In fact, wages growth including bonuses was lower than wages growth excluding bonuses for the first time since the COVID pandemics. Looking forward, the recent fall in hours worked, along with a corresponding lift in underemployment, that is those workers who are employed but looking for more hours to work, points to a softening in wages growth. Historically, when the growth in hours work has been below 1.5% per annum, wages growth tends to moderate to below 3.5%. This is consistent with our look for wages to do just that. So what does all this mean? Now that wage inflation is back around consumer price inflation, it does not mean that households' incomes are back to where they were relative to household expenditure. What it does mean is that wages now, on average, are starting to close the gap for the cost of living. But this is an average, and as noted, some jobs have been closing the gap more rapidly, while others may have actually seen it continue to widen. Behind this more recent pickup is the lagged effect of the tight labour market in 2022 going into 2023. We're already seeing wages in sectors more responsive to the labour market conditions soften. As such, those sectors less responsive are likely to see the wage inflation moderate as we move through this year. When this is combined with our expectation for productivity to lift through this year, as firms invest to increase output in response to a tight labour market and rising wages, as well as a moderation in population growth, this will all combine to reduce domestic inflationary pressure and help ensure that inflation falls back close to 3% by the end of this year. This moderation in inflation, due to a moderation in domestic inflationary pressures, will open the door for a rate cut from the Reserve Bank, even if inflation is not back to the midpoint of their target band. We're expecting the first rate cut from the Reserve Bank to be in September this year.
The content of this recording is informational and of general nature only and is not intended to constitute a research report or reflect any recommendation or financial advice. It has been prepared without taking into account your objectives, financial situation or needs, and investment decisions should not be based on it. You should obtain your own independent advice before proceeding with any investment decision. Whilst every effort has been taken to ensure that the contents are correct and any opinions, forecasts, conclusions are reasonably held based on information at the date of recording, Westpac does not make any representation or warranty as to the accuracy or completeness of the statements or information contained in this recording, and any liability therefore is expressly disclaimed to the extent permitted by law. None of the material included in this recording should be copied, published or reproduced in whole or in part without the prior written permission of Westpac.